Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lila Rose Show. You've probably seen the media headlines about the tragic case of Adriana Smith. Adriana Smith was a young mother who was pregnant with her second baby, who experienced some sort of a blood clotting event where she ended up in the hospital and dying. According to media reports, she is now brain dead, which is dead, and she is on life support. So she was on life support and then they declared her brain dead. The baby is still alive. And so the hospital is keeping her on life support because the baby is alive, the baby is growing, and now the baby is nearing the point of viability. So the baby, named now Baby Chance by Adriana's grieving family, Baby Chance is still alive, and it looks like Baby Chance is going to make it. Now, this should be heralded as a wonderful silver lining despite the tragic passing of the beloved Adriana, that this little boy, lovingly named Chance, is going to survive the tragic and early death of his mother. But instead, media reports are making this about how Adriana is being poorly treated, or at least her dead body is being poorly treated because, Chance is being given a chance to live, and that Adriana's family had no choice, and therefore this shows how big and bad pro-life laws are. This is all taking place in the state of Georgia, which has a heartbeat law prohibiting abortion after the heartbeat can be detected. Now, the reality is this has nothing to do with the heartbeat law in Georgia, and this has to do with another law that says that with advanced directives, that somebody who is pregnant, who may be in a coma, that you can't just pull the plug on them when there's another life at stake, because this baby Chance deserves care and deserves a shot at life. Unfortunately, that's not been what the media narratives have said in this case, and there's been a lot of confusion, even in some pro-life circles, about this case. And we're going to have on today Father Tad Pacholczyk, who is the senior ethicist at the National Catholic Bioethics Center. I think Father Tad's position on this makes the case very clear for any person of good conscience, certainly any pro-life person, as to why, of course, we should give Baby Chance a chance. And of course, it's very good that Georgia law protects babies like Baby Chance. Father Tad, thanks so much for joining the show.
Lila, great pleasure. Glad to be able to do it.
So you and I were speaking recently about the Adriana Smith case, which is a very tragic case with a beautiful silver lining that has been making the media headlines over the last few weeks. For our listeners, can you first share what you understand to be the details of the Adriana Smith case?
Yeah, so her case it's kind of a rare case, medically speaking. So it's a case that involves her undergoing severe damage to the brain, apparently to the point that this resulted actually in a full diagnosis of brain death. So in other words, Adriana Smith appears to be deceased. However, she was pregnant at the time that she had this blood clot that went up to her brain, or perhaps multiple blood clots, and really caused massive stroking in her brain. And because she's pregnant, there has arisen a huge controversy around whether she is entitled to continued care in this situation of, basically attempting to shuttle her pregnancy further and further along to the point that the baby would be past viability, hopefully well past viability, maybe several weeks, multiple weeks beyond viability, and then be able to be delivered. And at that point, then the fact that Adriana is on a ventilator and she's presumably getting a lot of other interventions, blood pressure meds, maybe a heating pad underneath to help with warming the body. Many of those functions are lost when you're deceased, when you're brain dead, and you have to be more and more aggressive to maintain the kind of continuing posture of the body to be able to support something like a pregnancy. But again, after delivery, then none of those measures would be continued. They would be discontinued, and Adriana would be able to be, then sent over to the funeral home and, prepared for burial and for last rites.
Thank you, Father Tad. So my understanding, in addition to what you just shared about the details of her condition and the fact she's on life support, is, in terms of the media narrative on the case, there is a tremendous outcry from, again, media groups whose headlines talk about forcing women to incubate. The word incubate is often used, a baby There's language about this being dehumanizing towards Adriana, that her family should have the ability to unplug her, that she should be unplugged. And there is a quote that's used in some of these media reports that happened, close after she had been diagnosed as brain dead, from her mother, indicating some sort of a desire to have a choice in the matter as to whether Adriana would continue to be on life support, her body, while the baby, in order to keep the baby alive, versus let her pass, and that would end the life of the baby as well. And so the media is running with that word choice to indicate, oh, this is against the choices and the wishes even of her family and Adriana. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that you're right. The mom did say that. I have a sense that she might be at the point of regretting it, because she subsequently indicated that her family does want to see the baby be born, and they seem to be, at this point, generally supportive. So I think she said that at the beginning, and I'm not sure sort of how the communication was playing out with the hospital, and that's often an important level for the family to feel included in what's going on. Now, the doctors have given an indication that, well, under the law here, Georgia state law, we have to continue the gestation because, there's, as soon as there's a heartbeat that's detected, then there's an obligation to maintain the pregnancy. That was at least the initial claims, set of claims that was being made in the press when this whole thing started. Now, I think people have recognized that that law doesn't strictly apply, but rather the law that deals with advance directives in Georgia. That's likely to be the law that would apply here. And I forget the exact details of how that specifies it, but I think it says that if an individual is pregnant, that they're not to be, disconnected, that efforts are to be made. So, on behalf of the baby, of course. And I don't know even that advance directive specifies brain death, but just a situation involving a pregnancy. The advance directive language seems to afford an implied protection for the child in utero there. So, yeah, the narrative that you're getting at here, the incubator narrative, I think the incubator claim, it itself, Lila, is dehumanizing, I would say, because if you were to go up to just a woman on the street who was pregnant and showing, and you were to say to her, "Hey, you're an incubator," I mean, that's kind of dehumanizing. It's failing to recognize who she is and the choice that she made with her husband to bring new life into the world, and their openness and receptivity, all that, that's implicit in the state of being pregnant. She's not just an incubator. And so I think just because Adriana is deceased, I think the fact remains that she deserves to be addressed in less dehumanizing language and not be called an incubator, but to understand that when she was alive, she was a mom who cared, deeply about her child, and we can safely and reasonably presume that she wanted to see that child continue its gestation, and do well in the pregnancy. A lot of moms, they will take steps to avoid alcohol, to avoid eating bad things, anything that would put their child at risk. And I think we can, again, imagine and assume reasonably that this was the course of events for her. So she wasn't just an incubator. She was a mom. And now, yes, she's a deceased mom, and we can use that language fairly. But I think we need ourselves to push back when the claim is made that by supporting this child, that somehow there's a dehumanization or a switch over to an incubator situation. There's not. There's still a continuity of intentions from when this pregnancy began, and continued on. Now, just to say a quick word about the mom and the follow-up, I think as I alluded to, if there had been better communication with the hospital, then the mom might not have been pressured to make the comment, oh, we should have been allowed to be part of this decision making, et cetera. And so I think this was more of a kind of human dynamics failure than anything else. Now, should it have become the mom's decision? Uh, it's tricky because let's say that Adriana had designated her mom as her healthcare proxy. Now, if Adriana were still alive, then her mom could make decisions on her behalf, assuming that Adriana was unconscious. But now that Adriana has died, it kind of shifts over to a focus upon the child, the unborn child, whom they've named Chance. So the focus is now on Chance. And at that point, the question becomes, well, even though the mom was designated as the healthcare proxy, does that really mean that the mom would ever have any right to step in and say, we want to discontinue the care on behalf of this child and cause the child's death? I don't think so. Because if you are providing this important service of being a healthcare proxy, you are acting on behalf of the individual who has designated you, or maybe in this case, on behalf of the baby, and you're doing so with the best interests of that individual in mind. And the best interests of the child here are clearly not to be killed in the womb, not to be harmed in any way, but to be safeguarded, protected, to receive care from the medical system and to be shuttled hopefully to the point of viability.
So I think this is where the Georgia law, you mentioned the two Georgia laws that have been called into question in media reports. There's the heartbeat law prohibiting abortion. And then there's this law having to do with cases like a person on life support and advanced directives that they might have that would impact their child if they were pregnant, and how you are not, by Georgia law, allowed to remove life support from a mother who is pregnant, and unless there was, already the child was dying or, was not viable, would be dead in this point. So the pregnancy was not viable in the sense that the baby's already passed away. So I want to tease this out a little bit more, because this is where I'm noticing the pro-life space, there's some confusion about what is the right step forward. Obviously, it's never acceptable to intentionally end an innocent human life. In this case, removing life support from the mother would end the innocent human life of the child, but that would not necessarily be an intended effect. So I've heard some rationalizations to say, well, removing the life support, if that's what the family really wanted, for whatever reason, justifiable or not, if that's what they really wanted, they're not intending directly to kill the baby, even though the baby is going to die. So therefore, somehow it is okay. What is your response to that?
Well, I think the problem there is, do you have a truly proportionate reason for discontinuing the interventions on Adriana's body? Because when you talk about double effect, you're going to be requiring that there be, a sufficiently serious reason for engaging in this type of step. And so I think the type of argument that would likely come up from the family would be something like, well, we'd like to bury her, or we'd like to, be able to move to the grieving stage next. And those are certainly legitimate goods. We can't deny that those are worth pursuing, but not perhaps in this particular set of circumstances right now. In other words, there are other goods that are competing and that actually supersede those goods, and that would include the good of the life of that child. That child is a family member, factually speaking, and deserving of the continued love and care, not just from Adriana's body, but from the whole family all around, to the extent that they're involved in the decision making. So I don't think double effect actually applies here in this particular scenario. And the problem of having a single action that you're doing with two effects, it you would be able to, marshal it under that heading. It's true, but I don't think you're going to be able to say that the good effect is proportionate to the bad effect. So double effect really doesn't apply, doesn't work.
And is it fair to say that the baby is a patient of the hospital, so they have a responsibility to care for that patient?
It certainly is. And I think before she was diagnosed as being brain dead, the hospital had two patients, presumably. And as her brain bleed was getting more and more severe, I don't know if that happened in the hospital or if it happened prior to her arriving at the hospital, but at any rate, prior to her death, there were two patients, and that's always the case in a pregnancy. And after Adriana died, yes, we're left with one patient who deserves the attention of the medical community in that hospital. And, my sense, my read of the Georgia law would be that this is a reasonable course of action that they're choosing. They're recognizing they have healthcare obligations here, and they want to fulfill and carry out those duties on behalf of the single patient who remains under their aegis right now.
I think there is, again, playing devil's advocate here, because I want to allay any concerns that any person of good conscience has for giving baby chance a chance, which is what's being done, which is beautiful. There is another concern that I've heard voiced by, both those that support abortion and those that are not sure where they land in this case, that the use of the mother's body to continue to be the conduit with which the body of the baby receives the nutrients it needs in order to grow, as well as other support in order to grow and hopefully be born soon, is unusual in terms of the mother being dead. I mean, that's a very unusual case. The fact that now she's on life support and that's how the baby's able to continue to survive. And I think that has raised alarm bells for some people who say, well, that's unnatural. Throughout in human history, we haven't had life support in the same way where you could sustain a dead body long enough to deliver a baby alive. And so therefore, you're entering into a space that's scary, concerning, and perhaps this could be used, if this is morally acceptable to do it this way, this can be used in some other immoral way in the future, because you're instrumentalizing the mother's body in this way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I would hesitate to go as far as saying that it involves a form of instrumentalization of the body. I think, the way I would frame this would differ. And I would say the mom would want her body, in all likelihood, to do what it was doing prior to the point that she died. And one of the examples that I sometimes share is when you just think about motherhood more broadly, this notion of the mom caring for the child, even with her own body. If a mom saw that her child was slipping off of a slide at the park and she had to kind of throw herself down quickly and fall on the ground herself to break the fall of as the child came off the edge of the slide, she would do it. She would use her body in that way. Is that instrumentalization? Not really. Or, a more extreme example, if she sees a gunman with a pistol and he points at her and she's holding the baby right in her arms facing him, I think it would be a natural instinct for her to turn her back towards the gunman to take the bullet on behalf of the child. That's sort of it's the maternal instinct, it's the maternal desire. So is it instrumentalization of her body? No, it's a choice, I think, of charity. It's a manifestation of love. And when we look at a case like Adriana's, we can also look at it from a different perspective. When people die, they do a lot of different things with their bodies. They have a lot of options. They may want to do an organ donation of part of their body to someone else. So you could see this as a large series of a set of organs that are being temporarily donated on behalf of her child to maintain her child. You could frame it that way. when somebody dies, they may have a desire to donate their body to science. And, this can involve some pretty unusual uses, to use the same word that you used earlier. For example, if you donate your body to science, sometimes the body will be used for ballistics studies, and they'll shoot your body full of bullets. And you can say, well, gee, is that instrumentalizing the body? Well, look, if the person wanted to do this, and if everyone else in their family, was basically in agreement so that there's an understanding that this is what you're doing, they're not just going off and doing it on their own without any reference to, the web of relationships that they have with other people. This doesn't raise a problem fundamentally. And certainly the church allows people to donate their bodies to science. So can Adriana donate her body on behalf of the gestation of her child? Of course she can. And, it shouldn't be turned into some kind of argument that this is raw instrumentalization or unjust or, otherwise inappropriate. If anything, it seems to me it's, again, a kind of logical extension of the initiation of her pregnancy and the carrying and gestation of that pregnancy. This just makes a lot of sense as the next step, given the fact that there was this tragic, really sad occurrence of the blood clots that suddenly caused her death.
I think that's a very good analysis, Father Tad. Just to further clarify this, would you say that it is ever morally acceptable, in any case, to remove life support from a mother who is pregnant? And in this case, when I say pregnant, the baby is alive.
Yes, assuming the baby is alive, I think there would be some cases, Lila, where this might work, where it might be allowable. And those would be cases like, if the mom has very advanced cancer that is already metastasized all over her body, and you have clear indications that let's say she's at week, I don't know, 12 or something with the pregnancy, and you have very strong grounds for concluding that she is almost certainly not going to make it to week 13. So it's not a question of shuttling the pregnancy at all. And now the family is saying, look, do we have to keep the ventilator going? Both mom and baby are certainly going to die. We are way ahead of viability. We don't believe this is required in any way, shape, or form. This is a type of heroics. Everything else is in order. She received the last sacraments. Everyone in the family has come and said goodbye to her at the hospital. Then I would say, okay, that's a case where I don't think there's a problem of disconnecting. And, you accept the sad outcome that both of them will be deceased after that disconnection occurs.
And so based on what you're saying, let's say theoretically, Adriana or some woman in a similar case had an advance directive where, for whatever reason, this is highly unusual, she would have said, I specifically want to remove life support even if I was pregnant. Or if I'm pregnant, I want to remove life support because, and they have some invented reason, like I don't want the baby to live without me. There can be reasons that they would come up with. That, even if that was the choice, because we were talking about the language of what would Adriana want? She's a mother. Mothers typically want good things for their children. Well, there's also mothers who choose abortion or who choose the death of their children. So how would that, even with an advance directive explicitly stating I would want the death of this child via the removal of life support from my body, how would that still not be a moral action for the healthcare workers to make?
Yeah. So I think clearly one cannot act on advance directives that specify a path that is morally problematic, that is morally unacceptable. And to specify that you would, in this case, where, again, I'm assuming that she would spell it all out in the advance directive, that even if it were possible to shuttle the pregnancy beyond viability, I don't want that to be done. I think that could not be, followed in good conscience just because it was specified. And, I remind you of another thing about advanced directives. A lot of people have this idea that, well, once I write it down, it sort of, becomes etched in stone, if you will, and everybody has to follow what I've written down. The reality here is more nuanced, and the advanced directive will many times serve as advisory to the healthcare proxy. So I don't know who her proxy, is. Was it the boyfriend who, is the father? Um, I'm not sure. Is it the mom who's the proxy? Whoever the proxy is, they actually have more to say than what's written down. The written down part can be taken into consideration by the proxy, but is not something that is binding and necessary to be followed. So at the end of the day, certainly a Catholic healthcare system could never follow an advance directive that specifies an immoral act to be carried out. And, to my mind, this approach here, when you have reasonable grounds to believe that you can shuttle the pregnancy beyond viability, that represents, I believe, an authentic duty to attempt to do that on behalf of the child who is the sole remaining patient.
I think that's very well said, Father Tad. For pro-life people who are watching this story unfold, again, the media narratives, I think, are very misleading. It's almost this frenzy to urge that baby Chance not survive. They don't want baby Chance to survive. Tragically, it's like, what is the good reason for unplugging Adriana? And they just the best argument I've seen is some sort of choice or some sort of autonomy that, again, if she's dead, she doesn't have anyways, but it's a tragic thing in my view to see the media response here. What would your encouragement be to those who are pro-life about the importance of understanding these distinctions between extraordinary and ordinary care? I'd like you to speak to that briefly if you could, and about understanding how to speak about cases like the Adriana Smith case to help other people understand why baby Chance in this matter it is good that he's getting the continued support, and it is the right thing for both Georgia law to have that statute as well as for the healthcare professionals to behave as they are.
Yeah, I mean, your mention about how the pro-abortion forces are sort of wanting to twist and torque this in such a fashion that baby Chance doesn't make it to the end. I just like to think about it from another angle, which is what happens if baby Chance is born successfully here, grows up, and then becomes a powerful witness? Look what my mom did. Look how the generosity of my mom, even after she had passed on, allowed me to live and to come into the world and to have the life that I now have, which may be a long life for all we know. So that's I think, a very beautiful, very pro-life vision that should be undergirding what it is that we're always attempting to do here. Now, about the ordinary and extraordinary means. And so I want to say a little bit about those. When you have a situation like with Adriana, the use of ordinary or extraordinary as a distinction will apply only while she is living. Once she is deceased, you don't speak about that, because ordinary and extraordinary means rely on an assessment of the burdensomeness of particular treatments or interventions that you would be using. And if you're a corpse, if you're deceased, if you have died, even if you have some instruments still hooked up to you or some machinery, you're not experiencing any burden. There's just no pain. There's nothing that you can call upon as a direct burden to that individual. So the question then would shift a little bit laterally, and you'd say, what about the baby? Is the baby experiencing significant burdens here by this unusual arrangement that we've been talking about? And I would be inclined to say, well, there may be some burdens because his mom's body is not functioning at 100%. It's clearly got deficits. Doctors are doing their best to compensate for those deficits. So the baby may be indeed in some distress, but the question becomes, can we accept a measure of some physiological distress as this pregnancy is being shuttled in the hopes, then what appear to be reasonable hopes, that they may be able to reach the point of viability? Is that something, do the benefits outweigh the burdens? And the benefits are extremely high here, that if the baby is born and then continues on and lives, those are great benefits. And the burdens of some distress that the baby and the pregnancy may be under, I think it is likely in many cases to be able to be tolerated and is not an unreasonable burden. So we would say by an ordinary, extraordinary means analysis that we should, again, be continuing to care for baby Chance in the best ways that we can.
Thank you so much, Father Tad. I'm so grateful for your work. It's so important. And I encourage everybody to check out NCBC, NCBC or ncbcenter.org. And it's also fathertad.com, where they can find you. Any other resources that you recommend people make use of when they're learning about stories like this and headlines, and they're wondering what's the correct way to think about this from a pro-life ethical point of view?
Yeah, I think our website, if they look up especially some of my old columns, Making Sense of Bioethics, they can find a wealth of material there. And for those who kind of prefer the video world, they can check out, I have a YouTube channel as well with, I believe it's 8 full-length videos on a range of topics. This specific one that we're talking about, I don't deal with, but I do deal with another complex set of circumstances in pregnancy and the question of when you can intervene and validly apply double effect. So it definitely overlaps with some of what you and I have been speaking about during this interview. And so that's on my YouTube channel if people are interested in that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Father Tad. Keep up the great work.
Well, same to you, Lila. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your work as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Lila Rose Show. I hope this was helpful and illuminating to hear from Father Tad. Definitely go check out the ncbcenter.org and Father Tad's work. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.